Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're live, so I'll pass you off to Stacy, who's going to introduce you, and hopefully the room can all see you. Oh, no. Stacy, are you there?
She's muted. Oh.
There
Yes,
you go.
we are here.
Good. Room, wave to David if you can hear him.
Can you guys hear me?
Yay!
Oh, okay.
Yay.
All right, so just as a heads up, folks, we've got some slides to share while David's talking, but they're a little small, so we would love to have you, like, come on in, get cozy on the rug, join a seat up front if you'd like. We're really excited to have David share his research. He's going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a chance to do some Q&A with him afterwards. So take it away, David, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Everyone's on the rug. It's like kindergarten. Hi everyone. I'm David Yeager. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Texas. And one of the things we've been thinking about a lot is how to help young people adopt a mindset towards their learning that allows them to fully benefit from the rigorous instruction that we give them. And kind of where we come from is often this idea that we can and should continue to improve the extent to which our instructional tasks push students to their intellectual limits and allow them to build and grow and develop their knowledge. But the beliefs that they have about themselves, about the tasks, about their relationships with teachers can really affect whether they feel intellectually safe enough to go on that journey with us. And that has led a lot of us in the field, and you guys in particular, to think hard about what it would take to create an environment where students are in a mindset where they feel prepared and ready to take on those learning challenges. And so, as many of you know, just as review, a lot has been said and written about several mindsets about belonging, mindsets about the purpose and relevance of your coursework, but also mindsets about what your belief about your ability and your intelligence. And typically, a lot of this work has focused on a mindset as something that's held and possessed by a child or learner, and that person, presumably uses that mindset, uses that possession as they enter the learning environment. Which is to say, that mindsets are often thought about as characteristics of individuals. Learned characteristics, for sure, they're not fixed, but certainly about the individual. And what increasingly people have looked at and researched is that mindsets are also discerned. That is, that they're also assessments that people make of environments as they enter them, and they continually reassess those environments. And those assessments, too, have profound effects on learning. So, to give a concrete example, a student may well, just if you go back, so a student may well have a belief that intelligence is a quality that they could develop under the right conditions, but they may enter a classroom where a teacher seems to believe the opposite, where what's valued is getting the answer right quickly, where what's rewarded is being naturally intelligent, naturally smart, and where struggling publicly or taking your time to understand concepts is seen as something that you're not supposed to be doing here. And so a key question as you try to create any kind of comprehensive, supportive environment is how you can both teach young people to hold a productive mindset, in the case of today's talk, a growth mindset, but also so that as they enter different settings, as they enter different environments, they can also discern, this is what's believed here in this setting, this is what the authority who holds the ability to reward and punish with grades, this is what this person believes. And so those two different types of mindset processes, learning and discerning, have potentially different implications for how you would carry out improvement research in your school. So if you go to the next slide, here's an analogy that may or may not be helpful for you. So as you know, Thomas Kuhn is a famous philosopher of science, has written about how scientific fields come to hold certain sets of beliefs. And in his famous book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he talks about how people come to hold a certain paradigm that is used as a way of organizing information, a way of making sense of data that people see. And if you could click. And then at some point there's a crisis. There's some kind of information that runs counter to normal science. And that leads to a period of uncertainty, where people don't quite know how to make sense of disparate types of information. The paradigmatic example is a geocentric universe. The universe revolves around the Earth. At some point, there's a set of observations that simply can't be explained from that universe view. And then after a series of crises, novel information, the field comes to adopt a heliocentric notion of the solar system. And then once people come to adopt that, then normal science can proceed again. And this is simply an analogy for the idea that if you imagine a learner coming to your school, if you go to the next slide, and again, there are many mindsets, but let's just take the example of a fixed mindset. A person may have a worldview. They may have a paradigm in which their intelligence is something that's that you either have or you don't. And it'd be natural for people to hold this view, as you know, because it's a prominent belief in our society. And and if you could click, so the normal science, but in this analogy, is that, for example, being a math person is something about you that simply can't change. However, you could then be a participant in one of our studies. You could get, quote, mindset learning. So if you click, you could read an article that the brain can grow and develop like a muscle. And you say, wait a second, being a math person can change. This is, what a relief. So this might kind of incite some kind of new paradigm shift. But again, in this analogy, there's some kind of ambiguity over time. Wait a second. I struggle on my next math assignment. What does that mean? If you can click. And I tried really hard, and I still failed. This seems like the opposite of what I've just learned. And then if you click again, and then, but then you could encounter some messages in the environment that could buffer students from this other information. That is, by also kind of discerning mindset beliefs in the environment, students may be afforded different interpretations of these data that they're observing. So if you keep clicking, then you could later, get to a new module, feel like it's impossible. You could get some other kind of message, maybe from peers, suggesting that in this setting, it's normal to struggle. It's part of the learning process, and so on. And so, so you can think about kind of mindset change as a process, and then you can start organizing potentially your improvement work around these different parts of the process. So one is a compelling initial theory change. This new idea that intelligence can grow, it's malleable, becomes a new hypothesis. It's just a starting point that you can use to observe data, like your grades on your next assignments. And you may either find support for this that makes you keep believing it, or you may find evidence that makes you return to what you believed previously. And so the latter part is kind of this mindset discerning. So you may see data, that is, you may see yourself improve over time, but you may also kind of socially perceive this new belief as something that's true here. And for any fans of philosophy of science, this is actually a big part of Kuhn's theory of how paradigms shift. As you start looking around, you're seeing all these other scientists who are using the same model, and you no longer feel like it's isolating and you're crazy for holding this this crazy belief, but instead it becomes part of the new social organization, how you are and live as a person working in that environment. So here too, as you discern what seems to be true here socially, then that too can support people as they go on this mindset journey. But then there can always be controversies. There can be moments of extreme doubt, and so you might imagine opportunities for mindset relearning. So, you know, like a booster is one kind of analogy we use here. So if you go forward, you know, we've learned a lot about this mindset learning idea, and we've crafted novel mindset interventions, and there's some interesting lessons from those. But here's like some screenshots. This is Carol Dweck and Greg Walton and I spent a few years crafting what we think is a better version of a growth mindset intervention. Again, that's an initial theory change. It's not clear it needs to be repeated, and it's also not clear it needs to be reinvented each time. We tried to make it as effective as we could for a particular population, in this case 9th graders transitioning to high school. And it very simply, you know, describes the brain learns when you work hard on your writing and math assignments, when you gain writing and math skills you can use in the future, and this helps you to make a difference for your family, the community, the world around you. And if you keep going, we invite students to write about social justice issues that make them the most upset. We then try to, we try to elicit this adolescent reactance to adult authority, and then we try to channel that anger about injustices into a desire to build your basic skills. So if you keep going, they then learn, well, one way to make a difference is to have a stronger brain, and here's how the brain works. Here's how the brain gets smarter when you struggle. Keep going. And then you learn, this is a quote that Carol and I wrote that ended up in one of Michelle Obama's speeches, back-to-school speeches in 2014. And so in this intervention, they hear the audio of the speech. So there's a kind of an implied mindset environment, that is, it implies that society believes this mindset. You keep going. Then you read from upperclassmen. This is a true story of a kid in one of our studies whose teacher talked about a growth mindset, and I'll read it here. Last week in class, I learned a valuable lesson. I learned that with a little self-discipline and a learning mindset, I can achieve heights I honestly didn't think were in my reach. I owe it all to Mr. Tremor. He told us stories of people doing impressive things, like getting fit from exercise, passing a previously failed class. At first, I thought it was a waste of time, that some people were just born smart, that they have it in their genes. Mr. Tremor challenged us to use learning mindsets for the week and look for a change. So I did, reluctantly. That week, I didn't miss any homework, a struggle for me. I was amazed. Could he have been right? Since then, I've only improved. And what we're doing here is, after teaching students directly about the idea of a growth mindset, we're trying to set the stage for a different set of interpretations about teachers' behaviors that may be ambiguous. So a teacher that criticizes your work, that gives you the hardest and most challenging work, that is really tough on your ideas, could either be seen as a mean teacher, or hopefully, after students have read this, that same encounter could be perceived as a teacher who cares desperately for your learning and growth and development, who's creating that environment because of a care for you. And if you keep going, then students are invited to author their own ways of implementing a growth mindset in their own learning going forward. Now, just to pause a second. So we've evaluated that in a number of settings. Most recently, we randomly selected 76 U.S. public high schools from across the country, around 18,000 students. And we find pretty consistently that treatment raises self-reports of a growth mindset, which is not that compelling. But the other thing it does is it leads students to choose to complete harder math assignments that they might get lower grades on, but that they that could cause them to learn a lot. And in a pilot for that, we found that treatment reduced DNF averages, especially so for lower achieving students. If you could go back, yeah, back. And so I say that because what that is that's a start to that process model. It's an initial jolt in the direction of more of a growth mindset, and it prepares students to perceive their environment as also endorsing a growth mindset, with the expectation that many times there are things that are consistent with a growth mindset that students may not be noticing or appreciating fully. But when we've done these types of studies and then tracked kind of the how much mindsets are sustained, this is data from Rachel put together. This is data from the Pathways with an analogous mindset intervention. What you see if you go forward is that from the start of the term to follow-up, where there was students completed a growth mindset exercise, if you could click, the majority of classrooms go up in terms of, it actually should say percent growth mindset, not percent fixed mindset, sorry. I have a growth mindset about my titles. And then, but then if you look 2.5 months later, you see many students kind of return to where they were previously. And so, you know, if you go back to the model I presented, you can think about how it's helpful to have an initial type of intervention, but what are you doing to kind of help students continually discern this as an environment where they can grow and learn and develop? So if you go forward, I want to talk a little bit about mindset discerning, which I think is going to be maybe the most important thing to come out of this presentation. So if you go forward, there are a few advantages to thinking about mindset discerning independently of the brief direct-to-student interventions. And what I want to make sure to not imply is that it's unnecessary and unimportant to set the stage. I think it's very important to use the best of what we have to help teach students an initial mindset. But here we're talking about above and beyond that. What are advantages to doing PDSAs and improvement work around mindset discerning? So one thing is that many very subtle teacher behaviors imply mindsets, as I'm going to show you in a second. And those are things that teachers can directly control. It's very hard to directly control a 15-year-old's beliefs, as any parent of teenagers will tell you. But as adults, we can often control things like our wait time or the types of assignments that we give out. And so one advantage is that the gap between what we want to happen and what we can change is shorter, because what we need to change in some cases is our behavior as adults. The second thing is that students' own private beliefs, their private mindsets, are really difficult to remeasure again and again and again in ways that you believe. I did just show you a graph that had 3 waves, but there's a reason why we didn't measure it every day. One is logistics, but another is it's not. At some point, students know the right answer to questions, and it's a little weird to be given a statement and asked to agree with it again and again and again. And empirically, we find that validity goes down the more you're re-asked the same question. And so, but it's easy to measure and remeasure. We think students' perceptions that they were treated with respect today. That today, my teacher treated me like they respected my intelligence. Today, my teacher made us feel like she wanted us to grow our ability. And what's nice about that is that teachers who could be great on average could still fluctuate on those. And ideally, teachers who are really working on their craft would want to know days where they, despite their best efforts, didn't seem to imply the mindset that they had wanted to. Which again allows for shorter time horizon changes. So an excellent teacher could on Wednesday have a lesson that really allowed students to grow and flourish, and on Thursday really implied to students that all they valued was getting the right answer quickly. And presumably, we think, a teacher could measure that using 1 or 2 survey items and get differences that could be meaningful in ways that it's not clear that from a Wednesday to a Thursday in November that a student changed and fixed their growth mindset that the student privately possesses is meaningful. Another thing that we think is really important is that as people learn about mindset theory, we start having a strong motivation as adults to think about the right answer. That I have a growth mindset as a teacher, and I portray a growth mindset, but we could often be wrong, and so whenever we can't measure what our behaviors are implying, then it's easy to kind of convince ourselves that we're doing it effectively. And I know that's something that even in my own practice as a college professor, where you want to look back on what you did and say, I did it well. But what working on mindset discerning does is it allows you to directly measure things that you might be guessing about and might not be right about. The final thing is that when trying to do improvement work and trying to explicitly change a child's beliefs, then when your measures don't go in the direction you want them to, it's tempting to make the culprit be the child. That the child didn't, or the adolescent didn't change his or her beliefs, as in he or she didn't listen enough or didn't listen closely, or something that the student might have done. But focusing on measures of what we've done as adults can, again, just more naturally put emphasis on what we do and what we can control rather than on what the child didn't do. So to go forward, here's one of the biggest findings out of our national mindset study pilot, and you guys are seeing this before anyone else, but it's something that we've been putting in our talks, is you might think that across the country, teachers who have read Carol's book would report more of a growth mindset, and that their students would say that teacher definitely has a growth mindset, and that students would get better grades. But that's not true. So if you go forward, what we actually find is that teachers who have heard of growth mindset, who try to talk about it in their classes, who've read Carol's book, are no more likely themselves to even endorse a growth mindset, which was a shock to us, because these are people who kind of know the right answer. Teachers' reports of whether they privately hold a growth mindset, which is on the left here, are not correlated with whether they say they would emphasize challenge and help students as they're making mistakes, nor did teachers' personal mindsets predict their math students' mindsets. These are math teachers predicting math students. However, students rated whether, and I'll show you the items in a second, whether the teachers valued effort, struggle, making mistakes versus being naturally smart. And when teachers successfully created that climate that students discerned, then students adopted more of a growth mindset, but more importantly, they got better grades in 9th grade math, even controlling for what you'd expect them to get based on their 8th grade achievement. So the takeaway here is that if you can create a climate in which students discern this environment, this classroom, this teacher wants me to grow and believes I can get smarter. When that's created, it's very good for student beliefs, but it's especially good for their achievement. However, just having heard of the ideas of mindsets as an adult, or even saying that you believe it, doesn't seem to be the magic solution to creating that environment. So if you go forward, here are the kind of climate items. We measured a ton of things. These are the 4 that predicted math grade GPA in 9th grade, controlling for 8th grade. So negative, this is a negative predictor. My teacher calls you smart if you're good at math. That leads students to discern a fixed mindset. When my math teacher asks a hard question that makes us think, he or she doesn't like to tell us the answer. He or she really wants us to figure it out. So lots of teachers say that this is their approach, even on our surveys. But saying that it's your approach wasn't related to whether students say that that's okay in this classroom. There's something more subtle, something more implicit going on. Another one is, this is a negative item, if you fall behind in my math class, my teacher does not slow down to let you catch up. The last one is, my teacher starts new topics in our textbook even if people don't understand the old ones yet. So this notion of kind of quote coverage, or trying to get through the content and not pausing to savor mistakes, to savor confusion, implies to students this is the kind of climate where you need to be naturally smart to succeed. And if you go forward, this is from Kathy Liu's son, who's Joe Bowler's student, and Joe Bowler has a really good new book. She also finds that mindsets among high school students are most successfully communicated by the implications of what you've done or what you're doing as a teacher, rather than explicit statements about what you believe and what your ethos is. So if you go to the next slide, just to finish up, keep going. Okay. Here, this is, I think, my assessment of right now of the field, and I'd love your feedback, is to still use or adapt, like one time, the best mindset learning programs that you can. You know, whether it's the the national study materials or the ones that SAKE has to offer, and then PDSAs are really great for just making sure those exercises are natural, they fit into the curriculum. Maybe evaluate with a one-time student self-report of mindset learning. But really, where research is too slow to be to solve all problems, basically researchers are really good at number one in the bullet point. I mean, we work with practitioners, but this is what we're optimized for. But that's like one exercise, one 45-minute exercise. Everything else that happens that's so powerful is something where researchers can't possibly innovate fast enough. And it might be helpful to sometimes place emphasis on practices that allow students to discern more of a productive mindset. And so some of these may be synonymous with good pedagogy and good teaching. They're not necessarily precise psychology as much as they are opportunities to be seen as someone who values growth, struggle, learning. And it might broaden the focus away from things where your personal goal is to change a student's mindset, rather which can be helpful in some cases. But another idea is a personal goal of creating policies or practices that simply allow a person to, with a productive mindset, to feel safe exercising that mindset in that classroom, like how you treat mistakes and incorrect answers. And so measures might focus more in some cases for some types of PDSAs on the mindset climate and less on the privately held beliefs of kids, which may be difficult to measure and remeasure. So that's it for me. I guess I want to kind of credit a lot of people. Kyla Hamovitz is a grad student of Carroll's who contributed ideas to this. Mary Murphy's research also contributes to this. And this is all growing out of our Mindset Scholars Network. So I'll stop there, and I think there's a think, pair, share, and maybe some questions. Is that right?
Yep, that's great. Thank you, David. So, well, I'm echoing, so I'll talk fast.
Hey, David, how's it going? Sorry, I think we're muted now. I just didn't want to be broadcast. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. That was awesome. Sorry, I tried to anticipate your slides, but I know it's a little bit challenging to advance them.
Cool. No problem. We're not disturbing. We're not too loud for them, are we?
No. I muted the one in the other room.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm running.
Working here.
So I think we're just going to open it up to a couple questions after this, and so there might be a little bit of an echo or feedback, so we'll just try to mute and unmute as much as possible.
Cool.
But thank you. Thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, was that, sorry, it was actually ended up being 30 minutes, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I think it was great. I think, well, did they take me off? No, it's good, and it's good. I mean, this is a good group. They're all. What's interesting is that we have teachers at every level that are kind of doing this work in high school, elementary school, and middle school. So this is a good audience to capture.
Great.
And I'm just going to check in and make sure they're ready to go.
Okay.
It was so loud in here like 10 seconds ago. Great. And Carly, can you say it really loud? You might need to come up because we're going to unmute you so we don't get too much echo. Okay. All right, go.
David, we were talking a little bit about the idea of students and their perceptions of themselves, and that we've got this ease of surveying right now, and that's like the easiest way to ask students how they feel and what they feel like they're getting assessed. But we're getting almost into the over surveying, and so it becomes repetitive, and students almost know what you're looking for. Do you have any other suggestions on ways to get some of that student insight outside of some of those like easy strategies of surveying?
Yeah. Oh wait, there's people don't like being over-surveyed, but they especially don't like it when they don't see why or how their data are being used. When it's not clear that their feedback is well being fed back. So one question is to think about: are you measuring only essential things, and are you fully using what you are measuring, and is it clear to students how their reports are being informative? Because if students see it as a way to influence adults who have authority over important decisions, then it can be an empowering experience. So one kind of crazy idea I had. This is completely unsubstantiated by science. It's completely unsubstantiated by science. Is like a single item measure for high schoolers every day would be, I felt respected by my teacher today. And like a lot of things create feelings of disrespect, like stereotype threat, being treated like you're not smart, being excluded in some way. And sometimes it's not always important what it was, as a teacher. That it's not clear that you need to distinguish all those. And even being asked whether you felt respected today itself implies that that's what the adults value. So that's not like a recommendation, but that's an idea that you might innovate around. So then you could say, well, what are things that are not surveys, where you could also measure engagement? And there are two types of things. One is a performance task. You could invent a fake scenario and see like how many people do it. You can control the base rate of something. Like you could offer extra credit assignment. You can offer a choice of a hard problem that they learn a lot or an easy problem they get right away. There's only a certain number of times you can do that. Another is obviously passive data, but it just takes a ton of data analytics and analytic horsepower to make sense of that. Passive data being like logins or text messages or anything else that could kind of be a measure of engagement. But the problem is a lot of those are not things that are what you always care about, because sometimes what you care about is how you actually do care about how a person feels, and that can sometimes only be measured by asking them how they feel. Yeah. So are there follow-up questions to that? Because I could go in a lot of different directions, but I don't want to overdo it.
I have a follow-up question, David.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm really interested in about is, so you ask all the students, did you feel respected today? And let's say that, 75% of them say yes and 25% of them say no, right? So I'm just curious about, like, you talked about some of those boosters that, it seemed like you were implying would be given to the whole class at a specific period of time and sort of like their journey towards a growth mindset. And I'm just wondering, like, have you thought about, like, giving individualized or personalized, like, boosters based on that sort of, like, those are the kids who don't feel respected, and if so, how would you imagine that working?
Yeah. So the improvement methodology would be, presuming you had a dichotomous yes/no, then you'd have a median over time, and then you would try to introduce some kind of change, and you would kind of know around this time of year, typically 80% of my students are feeling pretty good, feeling that they're being respected. Then you would say, I think I can make another 10% go up if I give them a leadership responsibility. Let's make something up. Then you could, keep measuring, and you could look at a shift over time, and that's one class, one data point that might be informative. You might ask a colleague to do something similar. If you're going to do that, you would have to guess who are the students who are feeling disrespected in some way. The part of the advantage of anonymous self-reports is people feel like they can be honest. Part of the disadvantage is you can't target feedback to individuals. If students are doing learning content online and you can track over time, then you could have things like a trigger for students who were doing well in previous tests and then bomb the most recent one. And we actually try to do that not in an automated way, but in a personalized way with the Statway improvement community. We created 6 different boosters that were timed for different events. So it was like the start of a new, really challenging unit when a student who maybe did well before, but they're going to say, well, I'm not going to do well, and once we're at factory. Another one was a student who's kind of surprisingly bombed a test that they previously thought they were going to do well at. See, I think I have. Yeah, here's my talk. Another one was just a loss of confidence in general. Another one was a student who's uncomfortable studying with others. Another one was a student who was coming back from semester break, and then was trying to get remotivated. So you could have a menu of boosters that could be available for common crises of confidence that students are likely to encounter. And then teachers would have to know their students well enough to predict that a certain student was going through that, and that could be delivered. Anyway, those are all available. They're available through Rachel, through the SAKE community. They could be adapted for high school. I'd love it if you guys tested those, because we've only tested them with a few people, I think, in the community college work, and they haven't really been adapted for high school.
So I'm wondering, given how important that discerning mindsets piece is there research into sort of what elements of the climate make the most impact in terms of the messages, the implicit messages our students are taking away? So for instance, the grading system, or is it the nature of the tasks? Like, how much research is there into what specific elements of a classroom culture impact most what messages students are taking away?
Yeah. That work is just beginning, and so I'll tell you what the findings are so far. But honestly, my hope is that through you guys as members of the SAKE community, you'll discover a lot of those things. However, so far, Kyla Hamovit's work finds that adults' mindsets aren't very good predictors of whether kids adopt a mindset or show challenge-seeking. But their willingness, their kind of anxiety around mistakes is a huge predictor. So when kids asked to, it's cold called, asked to solve some kind of math problem or weigh in on some theory in biology, and the teacher maybe has a really low wait time, or a kid makes a mistake and then the teacher intervenes really quickly to kind of give the kid the answer so they could kind of save face in front of peers. That has some advantages, and many teachers, when interviewed in these studies, feel as though helping the kid out is a way of supporting them. But in interviews with students infer that teachers have done that because they have a low estimate of their ability. In classic work, Kent Harbour, who's at Rutgers, did work on majority group teachers providing critical feedback to minority group students. And what they found was that well-meaning white teachers withheld criticism from black students, in part because of a worry about harming self-esteem. But black students perceived that as the teacher having lower standards and as thinking that they weren't smart enough to reach the higher standard. And so Kent Harbour calls it the feedback withholding bias. And they started as lab studies, but then he surveyed tons of teachers in New Jersey, high school teachers, and finds this pretty consistently. And then the irony is that students of color didn't get feedback, and so they didn't improve. And so out of a desire to communicate positive mindset climate of support, it actually implied that, just to repeat myself, implied to the student that the teacher had a low opinion of the student's ability and actually led to less development of ability. So those are, yeah.
Great.
Did someone ask a question? Oh, is there? Oh, this is my wait time.
I'm going to take a cue and say that I think we're good.
One has one.
Okay, yes, Lillian.
I've heard that Jeffrey Cohen and Greg Walton at Stanford have partnered with the middle school in San Francisco to start a school where they are doing a lot of these like booster interventions. Have you heard anything about like what results they've gotten or what's been working there, given that's a school where this is like intentionally designed?
They're starting us?
Okay. So I've heard that that Greg Walton and Jeffrey Cohen have like partnered with a school in San Francisco, a new middle school in San Francisco, where they're like bring a lot of these interventions into the design of the school.
Okay, they said started. I was like, Greg would have told me he started the school. Yeah, I mean, I think I think that's the challenge is, and you guys are really at the forefront. I mean, there's a difference between what we design for our randomized experiments, which we do. We create packaged experiences on purpose because that allows us to separate treatment and control and get causality. And then, but if you had the ability to change the climate from the start, what would you do? And I think that that's all ongoing. I haven't seen an evaluation of that middle school, but I mean it's hard to evaluate if it's only one school because there's not a comparison group. Yeah, I mean I think you guys have maybe just as many of the tools as the other school would have to do the same kind of innovation. So I wouldn't be surprised if as much comes out of your efforts as any other group doing similar work.
Okay, we're unmuting ourselves so that we can give David a huge, thank you, David! I suspect that we will be reaching out to you for other resources and those articles that you mentioned. Some of us might be very interested in follow-up. So thank you for sharing your work with us today.
Yeah, great. I also just want to emphasize a lot of this is really at the forefront and is new, and so as this work matures, we'd really benefit from learning more from you all. What kinds of questions do you wish we researchers would focus on? We actually do have a lot of latitude of where we go, so we'd be thrilled if you guys could share back what do you feel like are the most burning and pressing questions that you think we need to focus on. Yeah, so I look forward to staying in contact about all that kind of stuff too. So,
great.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Okay, so that was actually the perfect transition